For years, the National Park Service publicly listed around 15 to 20 missing persons each decade inside the Grand Canyon, usually explained away as heat exhaustion, accidental falls, or wildlife encounters. But internal documents obtained through quiet Freedom of Information requests tell a dramatically different story. Since the mid-1990s, the number of people never recovered has climbed almost every single year. Not injured, not lost for a few hours, completely gone. The official records only list surface cases. The real logs, the ones rangers don't like talking about, mention disappearances in places that aren't even tourist paths anymore. Most chillingly, many of the missing weren't reckless hikers or solo explorers. They were families, couples, and experienced guides who knew the trails like the back of their hands. Their camping gear was often found untouched, food still sealed, water bottles still full. In several cases, rangers reported tents zipped from the inside, with no signs of forced entry or desert animal activity. Search teams combed the area repeatedly, with helicopters scanning thermal signatures. Yet not a single footprint continued past the campgrounds. It was as if the ground simply opened up and swallowed them without a trace. What truly unsettles long-time rangers is that many disappearances happen during calm weather, broad daylight, and sometimes within earshot of other hikers who reported nothing unusual until someone was suddenly just gone. One ranger mentioned hearing distant voices calling for help hours after a reported disappearance. But each time teams investigated, the voices would fade deeper into the canyon walls. Officially, the reports say, search exhausted, presumed deceased. Unofficially, the internal notes repeat the same phrase over and over again: location unexplained, body not recovered. What most visitors don't realize is that Havasupai Lookout used to be one of the crown jewel observation points of the entire Grand Canyon, an area advertised for decades in travel guides and national tourism pamphlets. Families camped there, newlyweds took photos there, school groups visited every spring. But somewhere around late 2019, the location suddenly disappeared from maps, both digital and printed. The official national park website quietly removed trail descriptions and archived photographs almost overnight. When travel bloggers asked questions, the response they received was a vague message about erosion risk and unstable geologic conditions. Yet not a single geological report was ever released publicly. Rangers say the truth is a whole lot stranger. Several patrol officers assigned to the lookout in 2021 claim that certain low-frequency vibrations were detected underground, almost like distant machinery or something shifting beneath the rock formations. Helicopters flying over the area reported strong magnetic interference that corrupted GPS devices and communication radios. One ranger said a touring aircraft refused to fly over that region anymore because every time they did, passengers complained of sudden nausea, ringing in the ears, or hearing sounds that the pilot insisted weren't coming from the cockpit. Internally, there were attempts to lock the zone permanently, but instead of fencing it off the usual way, like with warning signs or visible restrictions, the government simply stopped acknowledging it existed. Satellite images were blurred on several mapping platforms, as if the area had become part of a classified zone. Hikers who tried entering anyway reported being turned around by unmarked vehicles with no visible logos or park insignia. Locals living near the reservation borders say they occasionally hear heavy equipment moving late at night, hauling something into the canyon or possibly out of it. More than one ranger has claimed to hear things after dark that, according to park protocol, shouldn't exist inside the canyon at all. One former night shift ranger said it always began the same way, a faint echo drifting upward from the lowest parts of the gorge, like someone calling out directions in a tunnel far below ground. It didn't sound like wildlife or wind bouncing between canyon walls. It sounded like words, fragmented English, as if multiple voices were overlapping inside a cavern nobody knew was there. He said the strangest part wasn't the sound itself. It was that the canyon felt completely still each time. Not a breeze, not an insect, nothing moving except those slow, echoing whispers. Some rangers believed it was radio interference from hikers using walkie-talkies until several of them switched channels and shut their radios off entirely. And the voices kept going. A few officers described what sounded like conversations, almost casual, but impossible to decipher. The voices stayed steady for minutes at a time, then abruptly stopped like someone had put a hand over a speaker. One ranger tried calling out once, just to check if maybe someone was stranded. The moment he said, "Hello," every sound in the canyon cut off instantly, like the night itself was listening back. He never tried again. There were also nights when patrol teams reported hearing what sounded like a woman asking for help, repeating the same sentence in the exact same tone over and over again. It wasn't panicked. It was steady, almost rehearsed. But whenever thermal drones were deployed to investigate, the feed would glitch the moment it reached the lookout zone. Rangers eventually stopped logging the incidents entirely because supervisors instructed them to categorize anything unexplained as acoustic distortion caused by canyon acoustics. Even when multiple officers reported the same voice pattern on the same night. Rangers say everyone knows the official line is bogus, but no one wants to be the one who files a report that forces the government to acknowledge what's really echoing down there. According to members of the Havasupai tribe, unusual events began shortly after a moderate earthquake rattled the Grand Canyon region in the summer of 1996. It wasn't a catastrophic quake. Nothing collapsed, no landslides made the news. But something underground shifted. Tribal elders reported hearing deep rumbling for days afterward, a sound they insisted didn't come from aftershocks but from below the rock itself. Some elders compared the sound to heavy stone grinding against stone, as if something ancient had been sealed away, and that seal had cracked open for the first time in centuries. They warned park officials quietly, but those warnings never made it beyond reservation borders. Local oral history, passed down for generations, speaks of distant caverns beneath the canyon floor that were never meant to be entered by human beings. Legends describe hollow spaces where light cannot exist and where voices mimic those who wander too close. Some stories even claim that long before settlers arrived, tribal scouts would leave offerings near certain crevices to prevent the watchers from crossing into the open desert. Tribal historians say those practices were abandoned only because the entrances were believed to be sealed for good. The 1996 quake changed that belief almost immediately, and suddenly those old rituals returned without any explanation offered to outsiders. Even more unsettling, several tribal hunters claimed wild animals began avoiding entire stretches of land near the lookout soon after the quake. Deer stopped migrating through their usual paths, birds changed direction abruptly mid-flight, and coyotes were seen circling areas they once crossed freely, howling toward the canyon as if warning something unseen. Rangers initially dismissed these behaviors as natural instinct until wildlife biologists quietly reported that animals were reacting to something underground, not above. Night vision cameras placed near tribal borders started picking up intermittent shadows, flickering too fast to classify, but consistent enough that the tribe requested certain portions of reservation land to be formally closed without offering a cultural or historical explanation. When former Ranger Charles Whitman finally stepped forward to talk, he made it clear he wasn't just sharing a spooky campfire story. He was confessing something that had bothered him for almost 2 decades. He claimed the voices drifting up from the canyon didn't follow normal human rhythm or breathing patterns. They repeated phrases the same way every single night, like a recording stuck on a loop. Sometimes the same sentence came with different tones, as if something was trying to learn how humans sounded and was testing multiple versions. Whitman said the moment you realized those weren't natural variations, that's when fear kicked in. The idea that whatever was down there was practicing. Whitman recalled one night during his final year on patrol when he heard someone calling his name, his actual name, from deep within a narrow ravine that wasn't marked on any visitor map. He froze, not because someone knew who he was, but because the voice didn't sound like one voice. It was layered, overlapping, like multiple throats saying the same word in slightly different timing. He described it as if the canyon was borrowing his name and giving it back in pieces. He turned on his searchlight, but the beam flickered and pulsed like something underwater, and he said he felt an overwhelming pressure behind his ears, like static building up from all directions. Other retired rangers have privately backed up Whitman's claims, saying they too heard familiar voices calling out during patrol, sometimes sounding like a family member, sometimes like another ranger who wasn't on shift that night. One ranger swore he heard a little kid giggling very close behind him after midnight, but when he spun around, there wasn't even wind moving. Several rangers reported having sudden nosebleeds right after those encounters, and a few developed tinnitus that never fully went away. None of these symptoms appear in official injury reports, but Whitman insists that's intentional. He believes responding to those voices is exactly what whatever's beneath the canyon wants. And every missing hiker who called out for help might have been answering something, pretending to sound human. So maybe the Grand Canyon didn't suddenly become dangerous. Maybe it finally stopped hiding what it always was. People say nature is unpredictable, but this doesn't feel like nature. Something down there listens. Something waits. And maybe it's been waiting longer than anybody alive can possibly understand. The national park still denies anything unusual. The missing cases are still written off as accidents, and tourists still take cheerful photos from a safe distance, never realizing that just a few miles beyond those fences, the ground drops into darkness that hasn't seen human eyes in centuries. And honestly, maybe that's a good thing, because if even half of what the rangers whispered is true, if those voices really aren't human, then the Grand Canyon isn't closing for safety. It's closing because something beneath it might finally be opening.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.